April Tinsley was 8 years old when she walked 2 blocks to borrow an umbrella. Her body was found 3 days later. Police collected DNA, but the man who killed her wouldn't be identified for another 30 years. And when they found him, he'd been living in the same town the entire time. April Tinsley, Fort Wayne, Indiana, 1988. On a Sunday morning in July 2018, detectives knocked on a door in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't read a warrant. They just asked the man who answered one question. "Do you know why we're here?" The man paused. Then he said 2 words, April Tinsley. He said her name before the detective said a word. He'd been waiting 30 years for that knock. And in those 30 years, he never left town, never got caught, and never stopped reminding the police that he was still out there. April Marie Tinsley was 8 years old. She lived on Hoagland Avenue in Fort Wayne with her mother Janet and her siblings. On Good Friday, April 1st, 1988, she left her house to walk 2 blocks to a friend's. She wanted to borrow an umbrella. 2 blocks. That's a 4-minute walk for a child. She never made it to her friend's door. And nobody saw what happened in those 4 minutes. 3 days later, a jogger found April's body in a drainage ditch in DeKalb County, 20 miles from her home. She'd been sexually assaulted and strangled. The medical examiner collected DNA evidence, semen, hair, and fibers. It was 1988. DNA testing existed, but CODIS, the national DNA database, wouldn't launch for another decade. Here's the thing that makes this case different from the start. Most killers who leave DNA at a crime scene are already in the system. They have priors. Their DNA is waiting for a match. But whoever killed April Tinsley had no felony record. He wasn't in any database. The DNA sat in an evidence locker, and the case went cold, fast. In May 1990, 2 years after April's murder, someone found a message scrawled on a barn door outside Fort Wayne. It read, "I kill 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley. I will kill again." He misspelled her last name, Tinsley, instead of Tinsley. But the threat was clear. He said he would kill again, and he was telling the police and the entire town that he was still out there. Detectives didn't publicize the barn message at first. They kept it quiet, hoping to catch the killer returning to the scene. But nobody came. Nobody was seen. And for the next 14 years, there were no more messages. No taunts. Nothing. Fort Wayne started to breathe again. Maybe he'd died. Maybe he'd moved. Maybe the barn message was a hoax. It wasn't. Now here's where this case takes a turn that even seasoned detectives called unprecedented. In March 2004, 16 years after April's murder, the taunting resumed. But this time, it was far more disturbing. A child found a used condom wrapped in a handwritten note. The note was placed at a playground, left where children would find it. The handwriting matched the barn door message from 1990. Within weeks, 3 more notes were found, each wrapped around a used condom. One was placed in a bicycle basket, another in a residential mailbox. The third was left in front of a church. Every location was within miles of April Tinsley's old neighborhood. One note read, "Hi, honey. I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped, raped, and killed April Tinsley. You are my next victim." He was choosing his next target, and he was telling her directly. The DNA from the condoms matched the DNA from April's crime scene. Same man, and he was actively hunting. The Fort Wayne Police Department went into overdrive. They collected DNA samples from hundreds of men in the area. They tested convicted sex offenders. They tested April's family members. They tested neighbors. No match. This is where the criminal psychology gets fascinating and terrifying. Most sexual predators who taunt police do it because they want to get caught. It's a cry for the chase to end. But this man wasn't just taunting. He was threatening a new victim. He was saying, "I'm still free. I'm still active, and you can't stop me." That's not a cry for capture. That's a display of power. Between 2004 and 2018, 14 more years, nothing. The DNA sat in CODIS, checked monthly against new criminal entries. Every month, no match. The case grew colder than any case in Indiana history. Detectives retired. April's mother, Janet, gave interviews begging for answers. The killer was out there, living, working, shopping in the same grocery stores as April's family. He'd never left Fort Wayne, and nobody knew his name. The problem wasn't the evidence. The DNA was perfect. The problem was the tool. CODIS can only match DNA to people who are already in the system, convicted felons. If your killer has no record, CODIS is useless. But in 2018, a new tool became available, and it didn't require the killer to have ever been arrested. In April 2018, exactly 30 years after April's murder, the Fort Wayne Police Department made a decision that would change everything. They partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company that pioneered a technique called genetic genealogy. Here's how genetic genealogy works, and this is the most important thing to understand about modern cold case investigations. When you upload your DNA to a site like GEDmatch or Ancestry, you're not just uploading your own genetic code. You're uploading a map of every person you're related to, your third cousin, your great-uncle. People you've never met can be identified through your DNA. Parabon took the killer's DNA profile and uploaded it to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database, and they got a hit. Not a direct match. The killer hadn't uploaded his own DNA. But they found a close relative, a cousin. From that one cousin, genealogists built a family tree, working backward through generations, then forward again, narrowing down every male relative who was in Fort Wayne in 1988 and alive in 2018. The tree narrowed to 2 brothers. Both lived in Fort Wayne. Both were the right age. One had no criminal record at all, which explained why CODIS never matched him. His name was John D. Miller. Detectives didn't confront Miller immediately. Instead, they waited. They watched his house, and when he put his trash out for collection, they took it. In that trash, they found used condoms. The DNA matched the 2004 taunts. It matched the 1988 crime scene. It matched perfectly. On July 15, 2018, detectives knocked on John Miller's door. He lived in a modest house in Grable, Indiana, a small town just 15 miles from where April Tinsley was abducted. He'd been there the entire time. The lead detective asked him, "Do you know why we're here?" Miller said, "April Tinsley." Miller didn't fight it. He didn't lawyer up immediately. He sat in an interrogation room and confessed to everything. The kidnapping, the rape, the murder. He told detectives he'd been thinking about doing it for days before he saw April walking alone. He saw her leave her house. He followed her. He offered her a ride. And within hours, she was dead. He also admitted to the barn door message, the 2004 notes, and the condoms. He said he left them because he wanted the attention. He wanted the police to know he was still smarter than them. For the detectives who had worked the case for years, the confession was both a breakthrough and a sobering moment. Decades of unanswered questions were finally resolved, but the truth was devastating. A little girl who should have had her entire life ahead of her had been taken by a man who spent the next 30 years living an ordinary life in the same community. The mystery was over, but the loss that April's family had carried since 1988 could never be undone. In December 2018, John D. Miller pleaded guilty to murder and child molestation. He was sentenced to 80 years in prison. He will be 139 years old when he's eligible for release. April's mother, Janet, gave a victim impact statement. She said, "I have waited 30 years for this day. I never stopped believing." The arrest of John D. Miller didn't just bring justice to one family. It transformed the way law enforcement investigates cold cases. For decades, detectives believed that if a killer had never been arrested and never entered into CODIS, they could disappear forever. The April Tinsley investigation proved that assumption was no longer true. Genetic genealogy changed the rules. Instead of searching for one person's DNA, investigators began searching entire family trees. A distant cousin, a second cousin once removed. Even relatives who had never heard of the suspect could unknowingly provide the clue that finally identified them. The April Tinsley case became one of the earliest and most significant demonstrations of what this new technology could accomplish. Since then, genetic genealogy has helped solve more than 600 cold cases across the United States. Murderers, serial offenders, and unidentified victims have finally been given names after years and sometimes decades of uncertainty. Cases like the Golden State Killer, the murder of Maurice Chivarella, and the disappearance of Fawn Cox all benefited from the same groundbreaking approach. Different victims, different detectives, different decades, but the formula remained remarkably similar. Preserved DNA, painstaking genealogical research, and investigators who refused to give up when every other lead had gone cold. In many police evidence rooms, biological samples collected in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s are being pulled from storage once again. Evidence that once seemed useless is now being retested using technology that simply didn't exist when those crimes were committed. Every old case file represents another possibility, another family waiting for answers, another suspect who may believe they've escaped justice forever. But here's the question that keeps investigators awake at night. How many John Millers are still out there? How many killers have no criminal record, no fingerprints on file, no DNA profile in CODIS, living quiet, ordinary lives in the very communities where they committed their crimes? People with neighbors who know them only as friendly retirees, reliable co-workers, or quiet family men, never imagining the secrets they've carried for decades. For years, many of those offenders believed time was their greatest ally. Witnesses forgot details. Evidence deteriorated. Detectives retired. Families lost hope. They assumed that if they could stay hidden long enough, the case would simply fade into history. But technology doesn't forget. Every year, more people voluntarily upload their DNA to genealogy databases to learn about their ancestry or connect with distant relatives. And with every new profile that's added, family trees become larger, stronger, and more complete. Detectives don't necessarily need the killer's DNA in a database anymore. Sometimes all they need is one distant relative and the patience to build a family tree that leads back to the truth. If you're someone who has spent decades believing you've outrun justice, the clock may actually be working against you. Every passing year brings better science, larger databases, and more experienced genealogists. The knock on the door that never came in 1998 or 2008 may still be coming tomorrow. For April Tinsley's family, justice came 30 years too late to change what happened. Nothing can replace the childhood she never got to live, the milestones she never reached, or the memories her family was robbed of. But after 3 decades of uncertainty, they finally had something they had been denied for so long: the truth. Her case is a reminder that justice isn't measured by how quickly it's delivered, but by whether it arrives at all. Sometimes the smallest piece of evidence can outlast the person who tried to hide it. And sometimes, all it takes is one breakthrough in science to solve a mystery that an entire generation believed would remain unsolved forever. If you enjoy deep dives into real cold cases, forensic breakthroughs, and the investigations that changed criminal justice forever, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, I cover cases that went unsolved for years, until one overlooked clue, one new technology, or one determined investigator finally uncovered the truth. And I'd love to hear from you. Which cold case should I cover next? Leave your suggestion in the comments below. Your recommendation might be the next story we explore together.